some of the examples of, for example, the federal Australia Says No campaign that was shelved last December and saw the light of day in 6-7 months later. And when we saw the campaign, we only heard about physical and sexual violence, and we didn't really see anything about the other forms of violence that we know that women experience. And from our perspective, that's tacit approval for men's other violent and abusive behaviour. That we understand that at an extremely high level in the Prime Minister's office, there was agreement that verbal abuse wasn't violence, and therefore let's get rid of that out of the campaign. If it's not named and if it's not demonstrated in the campaign, then men won't recognise it as being violence. I think things like the National Men's Helpline, Men's Line, which is run out of Melbourne, and it's run by a colleague of ours. It too, I don't believe, has the capacity or the expertise to really engage in the issue of men's violence. From what I understand, Men's Line train their telephone counsellors for 2 hours every quarter on the issue of violence. And they don't report on the issue of violence, they report on relationship issues. And that's where it stops. And that informs not only the practice of the service, but informs the way in which men are going to be engaged with that service. And what the response is going to be when men ring up and say, there is violence in my relationship, whether it's his or hers or both or whatever it might be. So I suppose my final message to you is that we really can't lose sight of the core issue of men's violence against women. We can't lose sight of the issue and the notion that men have a choice on whether they're going to be violent or not, that men must take responsibility for their use of violence, and once they do that and embark on a process of change, that it's going to, as Greg and others have mentioned, it's going to benefit their partners, their family, the wider community, and certainly themselves.
I think just a couple of points on the systemic aspects of supporting men, male victims, is that one point I didn't mention earlier was the fact that if a victim, male victim, goes to court, he is basically isolated from any of the support services that are currently available. The Women's Domestic Violence Court Support Scheme obviously would not engage in any support for a male victim, because basically they're dedicated, their philosophy is to look after the women. In that situation, males are really left to defend themselves, and quite often they may be asked, are you a perpetrator, what's your, are you a defendant, which court are you going to? So they're obviously misaligned all the way through the process. Another aspect of the males as victims, in the absence of increased numbers of unreported victims of male victims of domestic violence, I think the evidence around perpetrators, male perpetrators being or self-classifying themselves as victims is still a huge issue that needs to be dealt with, and that basically comes down to the denial of their belief system. And I think it's been expounded before by other speakers in relation to the way that they've really got to change their attitudes and their thinking processes. Too easily, males will see themselves victims even if their dinner's laid on the table. So I think there's a whole range of issues that need to be dealt with before, I suppose, male victims receive their proper justified response.
Thanks, Greg. Brief comment from the rest of the panellists.
Is that on? Okay. I just wanted to say three things really. I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that violence against women is gendered, that the World Health Organisation sees that we're in an epidemic of violence by men against women, and I think that that's the biggest thing. I want to applaud the men who want to work with men, and I think go do it. We women have been doing it for years. We've been setting up services to provide services for women escaping violence. Get to it, men, provide those services for yourselves and do the research that needs to be done. And when we talk about same-sex domestic violence, I think that actually hides the gendered nature of violence. Let's not talk about same-sex domestic violence. No lesbian has ever come to me and said, I identify as a same-sex woman. Women identify as lesbians or bisexual women. I think that using the term same-sex actually just hides the gendered nature of the violence.
I just want to say men are not equal victims of domestic violence.
I'd like to take up the point that was raised about psychological approaches to violence. While I'm not saying they don't play a part, I think they can take us away from the issue that gendered violence against women is a political issue. If you look on the Partnerships Against Domestic Violence website now, our national campaign against domestic violence, it says its purpose is to strengthen families and communities. We need to be active politically to address violence against women, and even more in these conservative times.
Three quick points, I think, echoing some other comments. First of all, to not lose sight of the criminal nature of violent behaviour. It's not a mental health issue primarily, it's primarily a criminal justice issue. Secondly, one of the main barriers for male victims in having support is traditional masculinity itself, and the fact that men are not willing to admit vulnerability is one of the reasons men won't report. So if we want a change in that, we need, as men, to be willing to give up the power that we gain from not being vulnerable. And thirdly, I think primarily the notion of men as victims is a political backlash position.
I want to really just say that we've talked a lot about men, and I think we need to be really clear about which men we're talking about. Are we talking about men as perpetrators? Are we talking about men as victims? And if we are, then we need to actually differentiate between heterosexual men and homosexual men, because the issues are not the same. They are in fact very different. And we've lost sight of the experience of gay men as victims in thinking about the issue of men as victims as a homogenous group. The other issue I want to raise is that the Same-Sex Domestic Violence Interagency is a multi-agency group, and for those of you who are interested in participating, please contact the Anti-Violence Project at the AIDS Council.
I think I would agree most of it, Leslie, in being reminded that domestic violence, violence against women is about it is a political issue. And there are reasons why sometimes people who will ascribe to a men as victims standpoint are actually putting out a whole lot of other different information. So I think for me, this particular panel, what it has brought out is really looking at the methodology of the research that is used, really examining and being brave enough to critically analyse each claim as it is made, to really unpack it and get to the nuts and bolts of it, and not just accept a claim or a statement as being so, actually taking responsibility as workers to apply critical analysis.